Good morning, everyone. We're back. We're going to talk some more NCAA basketball this morning. As you remember, this is my grandson Gavin, and we're going to talk about some of our thoughts after the first 2 days. We'll take Thursday, Friday separately, and then maybe give us a little sneak peek at what's going to happen this weekend. Our thoughts on different things. First, I'll just say Thursday. Wisconsin obviously was probably the upset of the day. When you look at, though, Greg Gard's record in the NCAA tournament is not that good. So even though he goes great in the regular season, you just wonder if the people of Wisconsin are going to be a little tired of exiting the NCAA tournament early. We also had the VCU versus North Carolina. Gavin shared with me that North Carolina's best player's out, so that probably played an impact on that. But VCU is an exciting team, and who knows? Gavin, Thursday, your thoughts on some Thursday games?
Yeah, I thought Texas looked good against BYU. BYU, one of their best players, is also out, but Texas, their offense is really good, and they showed that in the first four-out game and the game that they just played. Siena versus Duke. Siena didn't even play that good, and they really should have beat Duke. I think Siena shot like 38% from the field, and they were up the whole entire game. So that's kind of scary if you pick Duke to go far. TCU versus Ohio State. That was probably the best game from Thursday. TCU, their defense was all over Ohio State. But Ohio State, pushed back at the end and came up just a little bit short. And then probably the biggest winners of Thursday, I didn't really have in any of my brackets, or very few, was St. Louis. St. Louis, came out and just dominated a good Georgia team that is, they have high upside, but they also can lose to a lot of, lower end teams. And then, yeah.
Well, I got a chance to watch the second half of that St. Louis-Georgia game, and it was amazing. St. Louis was just perfect, and Georgia looked like they were ready to go home. So, I don't know, St. Louis, now we're going to get ahead of ourselves, but St. Louis will be playing Michigan, and that ought to be a heck of a game. Of course, as basketball fans and perhaps players, you go out one night and you can't miss. You go out the next night and same exact everything, and you can't hit the side of a barn. So we'll have to see how some of these teams that played so well on Thursday, if they can duplicate it on Saturday. I also thought that interesting, that TCU Ohio State game. I got to see a little bit of the second half of that game, and as you say, TCU was in total control in the first half. And in the second half, Ohio State made a huge run and actually took the lead, as I recall. And I didn't get a chance to watch the end of the game, but TCU did prevail in the game. So Thursday was, I think, the day of the upsets. I saw something on Fox News Friday morning that said that only 14,000 perfect brackets are left, when there were probably a couple million or something before this all started. 14,000 still seems like a lot for a perfect bracket, but we got a long ways to go. Of course, Thursday and Friday takes us from 64 to 32, and that brings us to Friday. I don't know, the key games Friday, it just seemed to me like the favorites did their job, and some of the number ones and twos were just absolutely dominant in their wins. But we did still have some that were very interesting, right, Gavin?
Michigan and Howard. I'll just start with that. I had Michigan going all the way, but in the first half they struggled a lot versus Howard. And Howard just made a lot of tough shots, and they were only up by 2.5, but they ended up winning by 20. But still, that's a little scary. Then Santa Clara versus Kentucky. That was definitely the best game of Friday. It went into overtime because Santa Clara came down. It was tied 70-70, hit a big three. Then Kentucky hit a half-court shot to force overtime. And that was just a really good game. Santa Clara, gave it all they had, but Kentucky just came out. And then Virginia versus Wright State. Wright State was up for a lot of the game, and it was a 1-point game with 4 minutes to go. And then Virginia kind of just pulled away. But I think if we look at Tennessee versus Miami of Ohio, they kind of dominated just the entire game, and they play Virginia next, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a Tennessee over Virginia upset. But then you also have a lot of people picking Akron over Texas Tech, and Texas Tech definitely did their job. And as you know, they played Bama next game, and we didn't really do our job in the first half, but we ended up winning. So interested to see how that 4-5 matchup goes on Sunday.
Yeah. And you mentioned, perhaps you already said, Virginia Wright State 71-70 with 4 minutes to go. So that was anybody's game at that point. And what you're saying about Siena and Duke, even though that goes back to Thursday, that's got to be a little worrisome for Duke fans because you say Siena's only shot 38%, and yet they had that game to win. So, it seems like people say that every team that ends up winning the tournament has a bad game that they somehow to survive. So we don't really know whether that was a bad game or whether that's just a sign that maybe this team isn't as good as what we think it might be. So that kind of brings us into Saturday or today. There'll be games and some of the matchups that look real interesting to me anyway. Michigan versus St. Louis. Now, St. Louis to me was so impressive and dominant, and they went over Georgia. I don't know if they can keep up with Michigan, but you just never know until they tip off and start playing the game. So Saturday, other games that are interesting: TCU versus Duke. We mentioned that Duke had trouble with Siena, and TCU had a very strong game against Ohio State. So who knows what might happen in that game? What's your feelings about Saturday?
Yeah, I like the TCU Duke game for TCU. Their defense is just smothering, especially in the first half. And then Duke, they really struggled against not a great team who didn't play well. So I really think TCU has a strong chance there. And then Michigan State, Louisville. If Louisville gets Michael Brown back, they played very good in the first half against South Florida without their best player. So if they get him back, then I think they could pull off a little bit of an upset there. And then VCU, Illinois. Illinois is a pretty upset-worthy team, but if they get all their starters going in the right way, I don't know how you can really beat that team. And then Vanderbilt, Nebraska, that would be a big test for Vanderbilt. Or for Nebraska. Vanderbilt's a good team, and Nebraska, they haven't really proved too much, but if they win here, then who knows how far they can go.
Well, especially Nebraska is such a great story because that game they won was the first time in their history they ever won an NCAA tournament game. Fred Hoiberg has put together a really good team out there. Of course, I remember him as a player for the Pacers and coach of the Bulls. And now he's a coach at Nebraska. So it will be interesting to see as the competition gets a little tougher with Vanderbilt, what might happen there. Of course, we can't go talk about Saturday without talking about Arkansas versus High Point. I mean, High Point pulled off the biggest upset of the tournament so far. The question is, was it a fluke, or are they going to be able to stick with and give Arkansas a game? And that's what makes the tournament so much fun because we don't know what's going to happen versus what happened Thursday, Friday, going into Saturday, Sunday. Of course, when it's all said and done, we're going to go from 64 to 32, and by Sunday night it'll be 32 down to Sweet 16. Talking about Sunday, I think the Purdue versus Miami game is pretty interesting. Obviously, I'm an IU fan, but Purdue was extremely impressive and dominant in that win. They were struggling a little bit at the end of the year, but then they got hot in the Big Ten tournament. And who knows? A lot of times the team that gets hot at the end of the year is able to carry that throughout. I don't know if you feel like Purdue's got the staying power, but I think I was listening to Clark Kellogg last night, and he picked Purdue. Perhaps to go all the way, I'm not sure. But time will tell on that one. I know Gavin will be paying a lot of attention to Alabama versus Texas Tech.
Yeah. That game, just to start off, Alabama versus Texas Tech, they don't have JT Toppin for the rest of the year, but they still have a good roster surrounding him. They're a very strong catch-and-shoot team, which so are we, and I think that'll be just whoever gets the last stop will win that game. I like Tennessee versus Virginia. Virginia hasn't proven themselves at all this year. They haven't beat a single top 25 team, and Tennessee, they have the star power. They beat Miami of Ohio by 20, and their best player had 2 points. So I really think Tennessee can make a run. I like St. John's versus Kansas. There's a battle of two strong head coaches, Bill Self and Rick Pitino. I think Kansas, has the better roster there, but they don't always put it together. St. John's, they're more consistent, and it could be really anyone's game, and to see who they play the next round. And then UCLA, UConn. UCLA has been really hot recently, and UConn, they kind of struggled against Furman for a lot of the game, but I think that'll be a good game too.
Okay, well, there's obviously a lot of good games coming up, and basketball junkies heaven this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Basketball games, I see, Sunday night? The game doesn't start till 9:45, so you're going to be able to watch basketball pretty much coast to coast as much as you want to. But that's kind of our feelings on different games. I think Gavin mentioned to me, I asked him, what did you feel like the overall most impressive team was on Thursday, Friday, and his thought was Arizona. I didn't see Arizona play. I would have a hard time not picking Purdue, which is hard for me to do, but Purdue looked so awesome in that game. So who knows what will happen as they move on. So it's been nice to talk to everybody. If you liked what you saw, subscribe, and you're welcome to leave comments. But have a great weekend watching basketball, everybody, and we'll see you next week.